It was a sweltering August morning. 2 bodies lay dead. Andrew and Abby Borden butchered in their own home. A daughter charged, an icon of guilt born. But the evidence never matched the legend. What really happened that day? Subscribe for the truth. Fall River, Massachusetts, August 1892. The air hung with a visible, oppressive humidity, a persistent weight that clung to every surface of the city. Cobblestone streets, still damp from a pre-dawn mist, reflected the muted, anemic light of a burgeoning day. A tracking shot progressed along 2nd Street, past an assortment of rigid, 3-story structures, culminating at a severe, unwelcoming residence. Its windows, dark and narrow, presented an impenetrable facade, observing rather than inviting. From a distance, the faint, sing-song cadence of children playing hopscotch carried on the heavy air, their innocent voices inadvertently echoing a nascent legend. A child's chalk drawing, crudely depicting an axe-wielding figure, was visible on a grime-streaked section of sidewalk, a silent herald of the events to unfold. Inside, the oppressive heat seemed trapped by heavy drapes and the dark, ornate wood of Victorian furniture, creating a claustrophobic environment. A yellowed newspaper clipping, its archaic typeface stark against the brittle paper, lay discarded on a table. Borden murders. Fall River in 1892 was a city defined by industrial prosperity, its landscape dominated by the sprawling textile mills that fueled its economic engine. Beneath this veneer of industriousness, a rigid Victorian society dictated behavior, status, and appearance, particularly for women. Strict hierarchical structures governed households, delineating roles for family members and servants. Andrew Borden, a man of significant accumulated wealth, yet renowned for his parsimony, occupied a defined social stratum. This financial standing, coupled with his particular domestic arrangements, established a foundation for subtle yet profound domestic tensions beneath a meticulously maintained facade of respectability. The tragedy that unfolded within the Borden residence on August 4th quickly permeated the public consciousness, amplified by nascent forms of popular media hungry for sensational crimes. This immediate and widespread consumption fostered a fertile ground for enduring myths, none more potent or persistent than the simplistic rhyme that quickly became synonymous with the Borden name. Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, gave her father 41. This narrative, terse and brutal, offered a palatable, easily digestible explanation for an incomprehensible act. It reduced complex human motivations and intricate historical circumstances to a crude, almost childish conclusion. However, the accepted narrative, so easily codified, often serves as a barrier to understanding. This channel embarks on a forensic examination, not to relitigate a verdict, but to systematically dismantle the accepted historical myths surrounding this case. Our mission is to strip away decades of simplification, to challenge the intellectual complacency that such a fixed narrative engenders, and to pursue a more complex, accurate truth. The discomfort inherent in questioning a universally accepted story is a form of intellectual dread. It is the unease of realizing that collective memory can be deliberately manipulated or unintentionally simplified, obscuring darker, more complex truths, or perhaps even systemic failures. What if the Lizzie Borden rhyme, rather than revealing the truth, has merely served to conceal it for over a century? What if what you think you know about Lizzie Borden is merely the most convenient version of the story? The morning of August 4th, 1892, began with the methodical grind of established routine within the Borden residence at 92 2nd Street. From the hallway, the grandfather clock's pendulum swung with relentless, metallic precision, marking the passage of time. Sunlight, struggling to penetrate heavy lace curtains, diffused into an anemic pattern across the worn carpets, illuminating motes of dust suspended in the humid, stagnant air. Andrew Borden, a man whose presence permeated the house even in his absence, descended for breakfast. His calloused hand, accustomed to the precise handling of currency and ledgers, briefly adjusted a cuff, an unconscious gesture of control. Andrew's breakfast was a sparse affair, consumed with an efficiency that mirrored his business practices. The frugality that defined his character extended to the domestic sphere, ensuring a pervasive lack of comfort in the stifling August heat. Bridget Sullivan, the live-in maid, moved between the kitchen and dining room, her uniform already damp at the collar with the day's exertion. Abby Borden, Andrew's second wife, joined him, her movements measured, her conversation minimal. The air between them, thickened by unspoken history, was still. Shortly after 9 a.m., Andrew departed for his customary walk downtown, a journey to his financial holdings that was as predictable as the sunrise. Emma, Andrew's elder daughter and Lizzie's sister, was absent from the household, visiting friends in Fairhaven, a detail that later became significant. With Andrew gone, the house did not exhale, but settled into a different kind of tension. Abby Borden commenced her daily tasks, a routine involving light housework and the preparation for a perceived visit to a sick friend, though no such visit definitively occurred. Bridget continued her work in the kitchen, washing dishes and enduring the oppressive heat that gathered in the rear of the house. Lizzie Borden, who typically rose later than the others, appeared for breakfast around 9:30 a.m. Her movements were unhurried. After a brief period of reading, she proceeded to the barn in the rear yard, carrying a small basket of fruit, a picture of deceptive domesticity against the backdrop of the ordinary, increasingly tense, morning. She remained there for a significant period. The hours accumulated, marked by the insistent tick of the hall clock. The silence within the house deepened, broken only by Bridget's movements and the distant sounds of Fall River life. Lizzie's prolonged absence in the barn, a common occurrence, offered no immediate cause for alarm, yet it contributed to the unusual stillness within the residence. There was no argument reported, no raised voice, merely the relentless, oppressive humidity and the heavy, uncommunicative atmosphere that had become the Borden household's norm. The seemingly ordinary actions of each occupant proceeded without deviation, cultivating a sense of preordained movement. At approximately 10:45 a.m., Andrew Borden returned. He entered through the front door, closing it behind him. Bridget Sullivan, having completed her kitchen chores, was on the second floor, resting from the heat. Lizzie, having returned from the barn, was reportedly on the first floor. Abby Borden's precise location remained uncertain. A profound, unnatural quiet descended upon the house, an instant of suspended animation before the inevitable. Then a sudden jarring sound, a scream, tore through the stifling calm. On the morning of August 4, 1892, at approximately 10:55 a.m., Lizzie Borden entered the sitting room of the family residence at 92 2nd Street. She discovered the body of her father, Andrew Jackson Borden, on the sofa. His posture was unnatural, reclined as if resting, yet his head was turned towards the floor, revealing extensive blunt force trauma. The impact had been severe, disfiguring the left side of his face. A footstool lay overturned near the sofa, and a section of the Boston Globe newspaper rested partially unfolded on the floor, suggesting an abrupt cessation of activity. Lizzie Borden immediately cried out, "Father is dead! Someone came in and killed him!" The scream alerted Bridget Sullivan, the family maid, who was resting in her third-floor room. Descending the stairs, she found Lizzie standing in the sitting-room doorway, her face pale, but her expression difficult to interpret amidst the shock. Bridget, instructed by Lizzie to seek medical assistance, moved instinctively towards the screen door at the side of the house, fumbling with its unfamiliar latch in a visible state of agitation. Within moments, Adelaide Churchill, a neighbour, arrived, drawn by the commotion. To Mrs. Churchill and later others, Lizzie provided initial accounts of her whereabouts. She stated she had been in the barn for an extended period, eating pears before re-entering the house. Later, this explanation shifted, with Lizzie claiming she had been in the kitchen, ironing. Dr. Seabury Bowen, the family physician, was among the first professional responders. Upon his arrival, he observed the scene in the sitting room. Andrew Borden's body was cool to the touch, indicating he had been deceased for some time. Dr. Bowen inquired about the whereabouts of Andrew's wife, Abby Borden, noting her absence from the immediate vicinity. Lizzie Borden responded with a peculiar lack of urgency, suggesting her stepmother was out visiting or perhaps still upstairs. Her demeanor, while outwardly distressed, possessed an underlying calmness that some observers found unsettling given the horrific circumstances. The failure to locate Abby Borden prompted a more thorough search of the house. Several individuals ascended the narrow staircase to the second floor. Each creak of the wooden steps amplified the growing sense of dread. In the master bedroom, the door slightly ajar, Abby Borden's body was discovered. She lay face down on the floor between the bed and the dresser, her head positioned beneath the bed. Like her husband, she had sustained multiple grievous blows to the head, suggesting an equally brutal assault. The bloodstains on the floor and wall indicated the ferocity of the attack. The significant temporal delay between Andrew's discovery and Abby's finding, despite her having likely been deceased for a longer period, immediately struck those present as a critical anomaly. The scene was one of profound domestic disruption, marred by inexplicable violence. Two individuals brutally murdered, yet no sign of forced entry, no obvious motive, and no weapon. Lizzie Borden's initial statements, varying in their specifics regarding her time away from the immediate crime scene, began to accumulate as points of concern for the arriving investigators. Her composite narrative, fractured and inconsistent from its inception, planted the first seeds of doubt in the minds of those tasked with understanding the tragedy. The house on 2nd Street now held not only the horror of its victims, but also the chilling unease of a story that, even in its rawest telling, failed to cohere. The absence of a murder weapon, combined with Lizzie's shifting accounts, left a chilling void, demanding answers that were not forthcoming. The arrival of Fall River authorities at 92 2nd Street initiated not a systematic investigation, but a period of profound procedural compromise. Marshal Rufus B. Hilliard, arriving shortly after Dr. Bowen, made no attempt to secure the perimeter or restrict access. The residence, a designated crime scene, remained a communal space. Neighbors, concerned citizens, and medical personnel moved freely throughout the house, their shoes traversing the blood-stained sitting room floor where Andrew Borden lay. These unsealed footprints, numbering in the dozens, effectively obliterated potential trace evidence including fibers, dust, and minute biological materials, creating an irretrievable loss of data. Uniformed police officers, including Chief William H. Knowlton, often appeared overwhelmed or passively positioned, leaning against doorways, seemingly oblivious to the concept of evidence preservation. No protocols for forensic photography were established, nor were rudimentary sketches of the scene initiated to document the spatial relationships of victims, objects, and potential evidence. Blood spatter patterns, crucial for reconstructing events and determining weapon trajectory, were observed but ignored, their significance entirely unrecognized within the rudimentary investigative framework of the late 19th century. Detectives' notepads from this period reveal sparsely filled pages detailing vague observations rather than meticulous time-stamped records of findings. Curious onlookers peered through open windows and doorways, allowed unfettered access to witness the unfolding tragedy, transforming a secure investigation into a public spectacle. Later, in the dusty basement, a small hatchet was located. Its blade, remarkably clean for a murder weapon, was handled without gloves by an officer, immediately compromising any potential fingerprint or biological material. It was subsequently placed in a bucket of water, its evidentiary value further diminished by this complete lack of forensic understanding regarding chain of custody and contamination. There was no comprehensive search for other potential weapons, nor was the hatchet subjected to rigorous processing for blood residue, hair, or tissue that might have tied it definitively to the victims or an assailant. Within hours, the investigative focus narrowed with alarming velocity onto Lizzie Borden. Despite the absence of a definitively identified weapon, a clear motive, or direct witness testimony beyond her own account, the authorities' inquiries quickly coalesced around her. There was no concerted effort to search the surrounding property for discarded weapons, or to thoroughly interview all individuals who had been near the house that morning. The assumption of guilt, particularly for a woman in her societal position, appeared to supplant methodical evidence gathering, establishing a pronounced tunnel vision that would fundamentally shape all subsequent proceedings. This initial period of uncontrolled access, contaminated evidence, and premature suspect identification laid the groundwork for an investigation fatally flawed from its inception. The opportunity for an objective and scientifically informed inquiry into the brutal murders of Andrew and Abby Borden had been irrevocably lost. With the very foundation of the case thus compromised, what hope could remain for an accurate reconstruction of events, or for the eventual delivery of a just verdict? Following the chaotic initial investigation, legal scrutiny intensified, converging on Lizzie Borden herself during the formal inquest. Convened on August 9, 1892, and presided over by District Court Judge Josiah C. Blaisdell, this inquiry compelled Lizzie to testify under oath without the presence of legal counsel, a standard but profoundly disadvantageous procedure of the era. The purpose of the inquest was not to determine guilt, but to ascertain the cause of death and identify any responsible parties, allowing for a thorough, non-adversarial examination. However, for Lizzie, it became an immediate public trial, her every utterance meticulously transcribed by court reporters, whose pens scratched furiously across paper, forever capturing her narrative. From the outset, Lizzie's testimony proved rambling and contradictory. Under the relentless questioning of District Attorney Hosea Knowlton, her account of the morning's events fractured. She offered shifting timelines for her visit to the barn, initially stating 15 or 20 minutes, then 30, then more, claiming to have consumed pears. Her descriptions of finding her father's body were vague, and her recollections of her mother's last known whereabouts varied. Officials observed her demeanor as alternating between initial composure and later episodes of faintness. Yet, the underlying current of her statements suggested evasion. This perceived duplicity, amplified by her seemingly dispassionate recount of the gruesome discoveries, struck many observers as deeply unsettling. The public reaction was immediate and visceral. Newspapers with headlines screaming "Lizzie lies" and "Fall River horror" sensationalized every inconsistency. The sterile, somber environment of the inquest room, filled with grim-faced officials whose furrowed brows conveyed incredulity, became a visual metaphor for the community's growing suspicion. Lizzie's own words, intended to clarify, instead solidified her status as the primary suspect. Her perceived coldness, the implausibility of her alibi, and the blatant inconsistencies in her testimony became the prosecution's most potent, if problematic, weapon, fostering a chilling sense of her isolation and guilt in the court of public opinion. The inquest concluded with a recommendation for Lizzie's arrest, and on August 11th, she was taken into custody. The procedural steps moved swiftly. A preliminary hearing followed, confirming sufficient evidence to proceed. Subsequently, on August 22, 1892, a grand jury convened, and after reviewing the evidence, including Lizzie's damaging inquest testimony, returned a true bill, formally indicting Lizzie Borden for the murders of her father, Andrew Jackson Borden, and her stepmother, Abby Gray Borden. Lizzie Borden, now officially accused of parricide, faced an unforgiving legal system and a town clamoring for justice. Her own words, captured in the inquest transcript, painted her as deeply suspicious, providing formidable ammunition for the prosecution. Yet, despite the pervasive public condemnation and the weight of her own problematic narrative, the central question remained: could the prosecution translate suspicion and inconsistent testimony into irrefutable proof beyond a reasonable doubt, or would the underlying weaknesses of their circumstantial case ultimately prevail? Following the grand jury's formal indictment, public scrutiny intensified, but the legal strategists began to dissect the underlying currents within the Borden household. Andrew Borden, a man of substantial means, had meticulously accumulated considerable wealth, largely in real estate. Recent modifications to his will and property transactions, specifically the transfer of the 2nd Street house to Abby Borden's sister and a prior arrangement regarding the South Main Street residence, introduced a stark financial reality. These actions, legally precise and devoid of emotional language on paper, indicated a potential disfavor toward Lizzie and Emma Borden, fueling a persistent familial discord over inheritance and property rights that dated back years. The cold, calculated nature of these legal documents starkly emphasized the pecuniary foundations of the impending conflict. The internal family dynamic, particularly between Lizzie Borden and her stepmother Abby, was demonstrably strained. Historical accounts detailed long-standing disagreements centered on perceived social slights, property ownership, and financial distributions. The formal Victorian dinner table, a setting for outward propriety, often masked this deep-seated antipathy, occasionally betrayed by a brief, frosty glance exchanged between Lizzie and Abby, signaling an unspoken animosity that had festered over decades. This undercurrent of resentment offered a plausible, albeit disturbing, motive within the context of the recent financial maneuvering, presenting a complex web of familial grievances. Crucially, the defense immediately introduced the unassailable alibi of Emma Borden. Documented evidence, such as a dated train ticket stub and formal correspondence, incontrovertibly placed Emma days away from Fall River in Fairhaven at the time of the murders. This fact eliminated her as a direct perpetrator and challenged any simplistic theory of a conspiratorial act involving both sisters. Bridget Sullivan, the live-in maid, emerged as the only other individual present in the house during the commission of the crimes. Her somber demeanor during subsequent interviews and depositions, her eyes often downcast under scrutiny, underscored her vulnerable but central position as the sole corroborating witness to the household's events leading up to the discovery. The defense, facing the challenge of Lizzie's arrest, promptly initiated the construction of a counter-narrative. Lizzie Borden, a visible member of the community, active in her church and social circles, was meticulously presented as an individual of unimpeachable character. Impeccably dressed, projecting an image of piety and respectability during public appearances, she was framed as utterly incapable of such a brutal and heinous act. This strategy leveraged prevailing Victorian social attitudes, which often posited that respectable Christian women simply did not commit such monstrous crimes, thereby challenging the prosecution to present a case that could overcome this powerful, carefully crafted public persona. As the legal proceedings advanced, the prosecution marshaled its evidence: the bloody crime, the apparent motive of financial gain, and the circumstantial presence of Lizzie Borden. Yet the defense had skillfully established its initial framework: a respected woman with an unlikely capacity for such violence, a crucial family alibi, and a deeply ambiguous psychological landscape. The immediate and potent challenge to the prosecution was laid bare, planting a profound seed of doubt. Could this pillar of the community, presented with such strategic finesse as a woman without obvious means or motive for such an act, truly be the killer? Or was the prosecution's case already fatally flawed by the defense's powerful counter-narrative? The courtroom on June 5, 1893, was a tableau of intense public scrutiny. Every bench packed, spectators craning their necks to witness the trial of Lizzie Andrew Borden. District Attorney Hosea Knowlton commenced the prosecution's opening, his initial demeanor betraying a palpable tension. From the outset, the prosecution grappled with a foundational deficit: the complete absence of direct evidence. There were no eyewitnesses, no confessions, and no indisputable physical link connecting Lizzie to the double murder. Knowlton, often seen shuffling disorganized papers, projected an image of a legal team unprepared for the monumental task of proving guilt, a circumstance attributable to the initial botched investigation. The prosecution's tenuous hold was further weakened by critical judicial rulings. Most pivotal was the exclusion of Lizzie Borden's inquest testimony, a decision delivered with the definitive finality of the judge's gavel. This controversial ruling prevented the jury from hearing Lizzie's often evasive and contradictory statements given under oath. The defense successfully argued that inquest testimony, taken without counsel and prior to formal charges, was inadmissible. This decision eviscerated the prosecution's primary avenue for establishing Lizzie's credibility issues and presenting inconsistencies, leaving a significant void in their attempt to portray her as deceitful. Another key element of the prosecution's circumstantial strategy centered on the alleged burning of the dress. The state contended Lizzie had incinerated a dress days after the murders, suggesting it was the garment worn, thus tainted with blood. Witnesses testified to seeing Lizzie engage in this act. However, the defense meticulously countered, presenting testimony that the dress was old, paint-stained, and that burning worn-out clothing was a common household practice. A discarded, charred scrap of fabric, a subtle visual, served as a poignant reminder of this potentially strong evidence, ultimately undermined by the defense's logical refutations, transforming a possible indicator of guilt into an innocuous domestic chore. The methodical dismantling of the prosecution's case continued. The state failed to produce a bloodied murder weapon directly tied to Lizzie, nor could it establish a coherent, undisputed timeline for the murders that conclusively implicated her. Attempts to establish motive through inheritance proved speculative, and opportunity was only circumstantial. Each investigative flaw, meticulously documented in earlier chapters, from the lack of immediate forensic examination to mismanaged evidence, was systematically exploited by the defense. Lizzie Borden, an impassive figure seated in the dock, observed these proceedings with an unreadable expression, her composure unsettling. The ensuing legal contest generated a profound sense of disillusionment, revealing the inherent limitations of the legal system in achieving unequivocal truth. The psychological horror was not sensational gore, but the intellectual challenge of reconciling conflicting narratives and the growing suspense that a definitive resolution might be unattainable. The realization that procedural errors and lack of direct evidence could potentially allow a perpetrator of such a brutal double murder to evade justice created a chilling sense of societal failure. As the defense delivered its powerful closing arguments, shredding the state's already thin circumstantial case with forensic precision, an undeniable question hung in the air. Could Lizzie Borden, accused of such a monstrous double murder, actually walk free, defying public opinion and the gruesome nature of the crime? On June 20, 1893, following a deliberation lasting approximately 1 hour and 5 minutes, the jury returned its verdict. The word "not guilty" resonated through the New Bedford courtroom. A mixed chorus of gasps and murmurs arose from the assembled spectators, punctuated by a faint, isolated cheer. Lizzie Borden, observing the pronouncement, displayed a flicker of an undefined emotion, perhaps relief, perhaps an unsettling blankness, quickly suppressed. Her legal exoneration was complete, concluding one of the most sensational trials of the era. The public reaction was immediate and sharply divided. Newspaper headlines captured this polarity. While some proclaimed, "Not guilty, Lizzie Borden is free," others simultaneously decried, "Fall River's shame," or "justice denied." Those who believed in her innocence celebrated the vindication, perceiving it as evidence against a baseless accusation. Conversely, a substantial segment of society viewed the outcome as a grave miscarriage of justice, convinced of her culpability despite the legal finding. This societal chasm solidified the moment the verdict was announced, permanently altering the public narrative surrounding the Borden murders. Following her acquittal, Lizzie Borden inherited a significant portion of her father's estate, valued at an estimated $300,000. She, along with her sister Emma, subsequently relocated from their former residence on 2nd Street to a grander dwelling in the affluent Highlands district of Fall River. This new home, christened Maplecroft, became the stage for her subsequent existence. Lizzie adopted the name Lizbeth Borden, an apparent attempt to distance herself from the public notoriety of her original identity. However, this change, coupled with her newfound affluence, failed to mitigate the pervasive public perception of her guilt. Despite her legal freedom and material comfort, Lizzie Borden remained a social pariah. The shadow of the murders proved indelible. She was largely ostracized by Fall River society, her presence a constant reminder of the unresolved double homicide. Even familial bonds fractured under this pressure. Her sister Emma eventually moved out of Maplecroft in 1905, establishing separate residences. This physical separation underscored a profound and irreparable emotional estrangement, symbolizing that even her closest kin could not fully reconcile with the lingering suspicions. The enduring children's rhyme, "Lizzie Borden took an axe," became a pervasive cultural artifact, cementing her alleged guilt in the popular imagination, regardless of the court's decree. The case of Lizzie Borden thus concluded legally, yet it offered no societal peace nor definitive truth regarding the brutal deaths of Andrew and Abby Borden. The persistent, unshakable weight of public opinion transformed her acquittal into a different form of condemnation, a life defined by suspicion and isolation. The profound melancholy of this unresolved narrative left an enduring question regarding whether true justice was ever served for the victims. Lizzie Borden was legally free, but the shadows of the axe murders never left her. and the court of public opinion had yet to render its final, damning verdict. But what if everyone, the police, the prosecution, the public, missed something crucial, something fundamental to the case itself, hidden in plain sight, awaiting modern re-examination? 130 years following the infamous Fall River homicides, a multidisciplinary team of forensic pathologists, criminal psychologists, and historical researchers initiated a comprehensive re-evaluation of the Borden case, employing modern scientific methodologies unavailable to 19th-century investigators. Operating within state-of-the-art forensic laboratories, the project focused initially on a meticulous re-examination of the original autopsy reports, witness testimonies, and architectural plans of the Borden residence. Digital recreations of the house layout, overlaid with hypothetical blood spatter patterns derived from contemporary forensic understanding, served as critical tools for contextualizing historical accounts and physical evidence with unprecedented precision. The core of this reanalysis centered on the timing of the two fatalities. 19th-century estimations of the interval between Abby Borden's death and Andrew Borden's death were inherently imprecise, largely relying on superficial observations of body temperature and the onset of rigor mortis. Modern forensic pathology, however, offers significantly more refined models for assessing post-mortem intervals. Applying advanced blood coagulation analysis, revised rigor mortis progression models, and detailed digital wound pattern reconstruction to the archived primary sources, the team systematically challenged the long-held assumption of near-simultaneous deaths. Abby Borden's autopsy description, particularly the state of blood congealment and the more advanced stage of rigor mortis observed, strongly indicated she had been deceased for a longer duration than initially presumed. Further comparative analysis revealed distinct characteristics between Abby's and Andrew's injuries. Abby's wounds, while numerous, presented a different trauma signature compared to Andrew's, suggesting a potentially different attack dynamic, or even a slightly different implement. The re-evaluated data now posits a critical interval. Abby Borden was likely killed approximately 1 to 2 hours prior to Andrew Borden. This conclusion, supported by current understanding of physiological post-mortem changes and blood drying rates, dramatically alters the established narrative. Computer-generated timeline graphics visually articulate this proposed temporal gap, presenting a clock face where the deaths are separated by a significant duration, a stark contrast to the minutes previously assumed. This scientific revelation introduces a profound intellectual horror. The cognitive dissonance stemming from the objective dismantling of a foundational assumption, one that has underpinned public perception and legal discourse for over a century, is immense. The initial investigation's inability to discern two distinct murder events, a direct consequence of the nascent state of forensic science in 1892, funneled the inquiry down a fundamentally flawed path. Every piece of known evidence, every motive considered, every suspect profile, was constructed upon the erroneous premise of a single, continuous attack. The meticulous sifting through dusty archival boxes by historians, juxtaposing original documents against irrefutable modern scientific findings, continuously highlighted overlooked details that now gained staggering new significance. The realization is inescapable. The Fall River murders were not a singular, frenzied act, but two separate, distinct events occurring hours apart. This staggering reframing of the timeline shatters the long-standing one-killer fallacy that dominated the original investigation and subsequent analyses. If Abby Borden died significantly earlier than Andrew, the entire scenario regarding who was present in the house, what they were doing, and their potential motives undergoes a complete, radical re-evaluation, dramatically expanding the pool of potential perpetrators beyond the immediate confines of a single, continuous narrative. The exhaustive modern re-evaluation of the Borden crime scene, particularly the revolutionary timeline established previously, necessitates a fundamental correction to the historical record. The long-held premise of a singular, one-killer, one-time event is forensically untenable. The distinct temporal separation between Abby Borden's death, occurring hours before Andrew Borden's, fundamentally reshapes the incident's mechanics. This staggered timeline indicates two separate violent acts, not a singular outburst thereby dismantling the foundational assumption of all prior analyses and opening pathways to multiple perpetrators or vastly different scenarios for each victim within the confines of the Borden household. One highly plausible scenario posits an external actor, likely motivated by a specific grievance against Andrew Borden. This individual, intending to target Andrew, would have encountered Abby first. Her brutal elimination in the guest bedroom would then have been a necessary act to silence a potential witness, explaining her earlier death. The perpetrator could have then remained hidden within the house or returned later to execute the intended attack on Andrew upon his return and subsequent repose in the sitting room. The differing wounds and attack locations for each victim are entirely consistent with this theory, illustrating how an intruder's path through the house could explain both fatalities without requiring a single, continuous engagement. Lizzie Borden's potential involvement must also be recontextualized beyond simple premeditated rage. With the staggered timeline, the possibility emerges of a spontaneous, dissociative break upon discovering one of the bodies, particularly Abby's. In such an altered psychological state, actions could have been impulsive, defensive, or even a misguided attempt to obscure evidence or protect another individual, known or unknown. Furthermore, the analytical aperture widens to include the possibility of a co-conspirator or an accomplice. The logistical challenges of a lone assailant executing two distinct staggered attacks within the small confines of the house and the potential for detection are significantly reduced with the introduction of a second party, whether an individual known to the family or an outsider with a shared motive against Andrew. The enduring enigma of the Borden murders is therefore less a testament to an inherently unsolvable crime and more a stark illustration of profound investigative and systemic failures. The initial narrow focus on Lizzie Borden, the misinterpretation of forensic evidence without a clear understanding of decomposition or blood dynamics, and the systemic failure to consider alternative, complex hypotheses collectively cemented a flawed narrative. These omissions irrevocably obscured crucial details, rendering a definitive whodidit impossible across centuries, allowing the true perpetrators to escape justice and the historical truth to remain elusive. The Lizzie Borden rhyme remains, a chilling echo from the past, its stark rhythm embodying a cultural fixation. But the truth, as we now understand it through the lens of modern science and psychology, is far more complex, more tragic, and perhaps still awaiting its full revelation. Andrew and Abby Borden never found justice in their time, their death subsumed by myth. But by confronting the myth, we honor the ongoing search for the elusive, bloody truth, forever woven into the intricate, unresolved fabric of American crime history.